Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a battlefield or a grand coronation, but to the coziest, warmest, and sometimes draftiest place in the medieval world, the great hall of a castle. You're here, a humble person living inside these massive stone walls, and the sun is beginning to dip below the horizon. The air, which has been bustling with the sounds of blacksmiths and servants all day, is starting to quiet down. You can smell the wood smoke from the massive central hearth, the scent of roasting meat, and maybe just a hint of stale ale. There are no light switches here, no phones to check the time, and definitely no digital clocks glowing in the dark. Your life, your entire rhythm, is dictated by a far more primitive, and frankly, a much more beautiful system. This is a world where time isn't measured in seconds and minutes, but in sunbeams and shadows. You probably won't survive this, not because of a dragon or a siege, but because your modern brain, so used to constant digital timekeeping, would be completely lost. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find a spot on a long wooden bench near the fire. The day's work of mending tapestries or tending the kitchen gardens finally done. The great hall is a bustling scene, a microcosm of the castle's life. The Lord sits at the high table with his family, while the rest of the household, from knights to scullery maids, finds their place further down the hall. A dog gnaws on a bone under a table, and a couple of squires are still polishing armor by the last vestiges of natural light. But you're not paying attention to them. You're looking at the shadows lengthening on the stone floor, a natural timer that tells you the day is winding down. In this era, before the invention of mechanical clocks as we know them, the sun was the universal timekeeper. Everyone in the castle, from the highest lord to the lowest stable boy, operated on what was known as solar time. The day began at sunrise and ended at sunset, with a period of darkness in between. The concept of a specific hour, like 3 o'clock, didn't have the same meaning it does today. It was more a feeling, a sense of mid-morning, or just after lunch. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more or less stressed by this lack of precise timekeeping. Did they feel a greater connection to the natural world? Or was it just a logistical nightmare? As darkness finally descends, a page boy moves through the hall, lighting the rushlights and placing candles in their holders. The change is immediate and dramatic. The hall, which was a vast open space in the daylight, now becomes a series of intimate, flickering pools of light. The conversations get softer, and the clatter of plates gives way to the gentle crackle of the fire. And there, on a small table near the high table, sits the object of our story tonight. A simple, unassuming candle. But this isn't just any candle. This one is special. It's marked with horizontal lines, a different color of wax for each section. This is your candle clock, and it's about to tell you when it's finally acceptable to go to bed. The candle clock, a mainstream historical fact, was one of the most common ways to tell time indoors during the Middle Ages. The concept was simple. A candle of a known size and consistency would burn at a relatively consistent rate. By marking it off at intervals, you could approximate the passage of time. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that King Alfred the Great is often credited with popularizing the candle clock in England to help him manage his days, even developing a lantern to protect the flame from drafts that might throw off his schedule. He needed a way to divide his time between prayer, work, and sleep, and a water clock was just too fussy. So, he turned to the reliable, slow burn of a candle. As you settle deeper into your bench by the fire, the day's fatigue finally begins to set in. The Great Hall, once a hive of activity, has now become a place of quiet contemplation. You watch the flames dance in the hearth, casting long, shifting shadows across the stone floor. Your entire life, you realize, is governed by a rhythm far older than any clock. You wake when the sun's first rays filter through the narrow windows, a pale, milky light that announces the start of a new day. You eat your meals when the sun is at its highest point, signal noon, and you prepare for rest as it sinks below the horizon. The sun is not just a light source. It's the castle's master schedule. It decides when the farmers go to the fields, when the blacksmiths fire up their forges, and when the cooks start preparing the evening meal. This reliance on the natural world gave people a different sense of time, a slower, more deliberate pace. It was a life lived in tune with the seasons, with long, languid days in the summer and short, brisk ones in the winter. You can't help but feel a certain peace in this rhythm. There's no frantic rush to beat the clock, no anxiety about being late for an appointment. Time isn't a commodity to be hoarded or wasted. It's a river you simply float down. You know you have a few more hours before you'll be heading to bed, and you can simply enjoy the moment. The conversations around you are hushed. The clatter of a dropped plate from the kitchen is an event, not a regular occurrence. The guards on the battlements are changing shifts, their footsteps echoing faintly in the distance. The castle, which seemed so imposing and cold during the day, now feels alive and almost cozy in the soft, flickering light. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly had a more relaxed relationship with time, or if this was simply a necessity born of the lack of technology. Were they genuinely more present, or were they just as stressed about getting their chores done before dark as we are about meeting a deadline? It's a fascinating question, but for now, you just enjoy the peaceful atmosphere. One of the quirky or fringe tidbits about medieval timekeeping is that some people would use the length of a prayer as a unit of measurement. A paternoster, the Lord's Prayer, for instance, was a common unit of time. And you might hear a baker say, "Let the bread bake for 2 paternosters." This gave a very tangible, if not entirely precise, way of measuring a short period. It also tied the passage of time directly to a spiritual act, intertwining the sacred with the mundane. Think about it. A 5-minute meeting would be a 2 Hail Marys meeting. It's a slightly strange but also kind of beautiful way to think about a schedule. The mainstream historical fact, of course, is that the sun and the ringing of church bells were the primary timekeepers for the majority of the population. The ringing of the bells from the monastery or the local church would mark the canonical hours, a series of fixed times for prayer. This was the closest thing to a public clock most people would ever encounter, a sonic reminder of the rhythm of the day. So you sit there, mesmerized by the fire and the gentle hum of the great hall. You're not checking your watch. You're watching the wax of the candle clock melt ever so slowly. The first mark, a thin red line, is still a few inches above the flame. That's your first milestone for the evening. The candle isn't just a source of light, it's a promise, a steady countdown to the moment you can finally drift off to sleep. And it's a good thing, too. You've had a long day. You were up at dawn, remember? That whole get up with the sun thing is no joke. No snooze button here, pal. The castle doesn't wait for anyone. But for now, you can relax, let your muscles go slack, and just listen to the quiet murmur of a world without a constant ticking clock. It's a gentle kind of silence, punctuated only by the occasional clink of a fork or the sigh of a guard by the door. The candle clock, this quiet timekeeper, is a marvel of simple engineering. You watch the page boy carefully place it in its metal holder, a small spike at the bottom of the candle, jammed into a tiny hole to keep it upright. The candle itself is not just any old wick and wax. It's a specific hand-poured masterpiece. The wax itself, A mainstream historical fact was typically made from tallow, the rendered fat of cows or sheep. Tallow candles were smoky and had a bit of a pungent smell, but they were cheap and readily available. If you were a person of higher status, you might be lucky enough to have a candle made of beeswax, which burned cleaner, smelled much sweeter, and was, of course, far more expensive. The quality of the candle was crucial to its function as a clock. It had to be consistent. A candle with lumps or air pockets would burn unevenly and make a mockery of any attempt to tell time. So the candle makers, a specialized and important craft within the castle walls, took their work very seriously. You've heard the stories of the candle makers, a quirky or fringe tidbit in the castle's day-to-day life. They were considered a bit like alchemists, mixing and melting, their workshops smelling of rendered fat and herbs. They'd often add scents or colors to the wax for the nobility, a touch of rosemary or sage to make the air smell a little nicer. And they knew a thing or two about physics, even if they didn't have a word for it. They understood that a thicker wick would burn faster and a thinner one slower, and they would adjust their wicks to ensure a consistent burn time for their candle clocks. A 2-hour candle clock had a specific type of wick, while a 4-hour candle had another. It was a secret craft, passed down from master to apprentice, a valuable skill that made the entire castle run just a little bit more smoothly. The candle is marked with little lines, each one representing a specific unit of time, maybe an hour or half hour, though those terms were still a bit fluid. Historians still argue whether the markers on these candle clocks were standardized from castle to castle, or if each lord had his own specific measurements. It's likely that it was a bit of both. In some grander courts, there might have been a master candle maker who created candles of a consistent burn rate for everyone, but in smaller, more remote castles, you can imagine a lot of guesswork and approximation. The accuracy of the clock was also dependent on a quiet, still room. A stray draft from a window or a sudden gust of wind from an open door could make the flame flicker and burn a little faster on one side, throwing off the entire timing. This is why King Alfred the Great, remember him? The one with the lantern? That was his clever solution to this very problem. He basically invented the world's first protective casing for a clock. So, as the candle burns, you watch the flame slowly eat away at the first line. It's a gentle, almost hypnotic process. There's a soft hissing sound as the wax melts and is drawn up the wick, and a tiny wisp of smoke curls into the air. The light it provides is warm and yellow, a stark contrast to the sterile white light we're used to. It makes the faces around you look soft and kind, and the great hall feels less like a fortress and more like a home. You can feel your own body starting to slow down, your eyelids getting a little heavier, mirroring the slow, steady progress of the flame. The candle, a quiet promise of rest, a steady, unfailing signal that the day is coming to an end. The real magic of the candle clock, the part that made it a true timekeeping device, wasn't just the burning wax, but the clever little markers attached to it. You lean forward slightly, drawn in by the gentle flicker. You can see them now, tiny, thin pins of brass or iron stuck into the wax at the designated lines. As the candle burns down and the wax melts, the flame will eventually reach one of these pins. The wax around it will soften and give way, and the pin will clatter down into the metal holder with a soft, surprising tink. That sound is the medieval equivalent of an alarm clock. It's the signal that a specific amount of time has passed, a tangible, audible event in the quiet of the night. It's a simple, elegant solution to the problem of how do I know when to wake up in the middle of the night for my second sleep? Or how do I know when the stew has cooked for long enough? This simple little pin is a mainstream historical fact, a brilliant piece of practical engineering that solved a very real problem. And a quirky or fringe tidbit is that some candle clocks would have little weights or balls of clay tied to threads, which would burn through at specific points, dropping the weight with a louder thud. Imagine a little chain of tiny clay balls, each one a little time bomb of sorts, waiting to drop and announce the passing of another hour. It's a very satisfying and wonderfully low-tech way to keep track of a schedule. This system wasn't perfect, of course. Drafts could make the candle burn faster. A bad batch of wax could make it burn slower, and the pin could get stuck. But it was far more reliable than guessing by the stars or the angle of the sun through the window. It gave people a sense of control over their own personal time, a rhythm they could set for themselves in a world where time was mostly communal. Historians still argue whether the tink of the falling pin was a comforting sound or a stressful one. Was it a gentle reminder to go to bed or a sharp alarm that you were running out of time? You can imagine both scenarios. For a tired servant, it might be the sweetest sound in the world, the signal that their long day was finally over. For a monk trying to finish a manuscript, it might be a frustrating reminder that the hour for prayer was approaching, and he hadn't made as much progress as he'd hoped. But for you, sitting here by the fire, it's just a beautiful sound, a soft little chime that is part of the background music of the castle night. The sound would have been muffled by the other sounds of the hall, the shifting of people on benches, the murmur of conversation, the occasional rustle of a page turning a book. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the castle was truly sleeping, that small tink would have been a significant event, a quiet punctuation mark in the silent story of the night. So you sit and watch, and you wait. You're not in a hurry. You're not trying to do anything except let your body and mind relax. The fire crackles, the candle burns, and you feel yourself getting heavier and heavier. The warmth of the fire is a soothing embrace, and the scent of the wood smoke is a comforting perfume. The world outside the castle walls is a dark and mysterious place, full of rustling leaves and unseen shadows. But inside, you are safe, warm, and for a little while longer, wide awake. You know that soon enough. The candle will burn down to its first marker, and the first of many pins will fall, a tiny little signal that another hour has slipped away. But you're not worried. You're just here, enjoying the quiet. In the quiet of the great hall, the candle continues its slow, steady descent. The flame, a tiny beacon in the medieval darkness, is your only true guide to the passing of time. A knight, polishing his sword by the fire, seems to notice your gaze and offers a wry smile. He knows as well as you do that the little pin on the candle is more reliable than the castle's bell ringer, who is prone to a pre-dinner nap. The pin, remember, is the key. It's a marvel of simple, pre-industrial automation. This is a mainstream historical fact, the method by which a passive tool was made active, a quiet signal turned into an audible event. But there's also a quirky or fringe tidbit to this. Some of the more elaborate candle clocks, particularly those owned by the very wealthy or found in a royal court, would have multiple pins at different heights, each one tied to a different weighted object. Imagine tiny, carefully balanced balls of lead or bits of scrap metal tied with a thin thread. As the candle burned and the flame reached the thread, it would snap and the weight would fall, sometimes onto a small brass plate to make a louder sound. It was an early form of a programmable alarm clock, a way to set multiple reminders for the night. You could set a pin to drop at the time you were meant to go to bed, another to drop for your wife to go to bed, and a third for the night watchman to begin his rounds. It was a sophisticated system, far more intricate than the single pin candle you're watching tonight. As the flame finally reaches the first pin, there's a soft, almost shy tink as it falls into the metal holder. It's not a loud, jarring sound. just a small punctuation mark in the story of the night. A few heads turn, but the sound is quickly absorbed back into the gentle hum of the hall. That sound, that tiny noise, is your official signal. It's the time you've been waiting for. You can finally, officially, begin your preparations for sleep. This is not a time for a sudden dash to your bedroll. It's a slow, deliberate winding down process. Historians still argue whether this quiet, self-regulated time was more or less stressful than the rigid schedules of later eras. Did people truly feel a greater sense of freedom, or were they constantly checking their candles for fear of falling out of sync with the castle's rhythm? It's a good question to ponder as you slowly rise from your bench. You stretch, feeling the day's aches and pains in your shoulders and back. The fire feels good on your skin, but you know that soon enough, the hall will be empty, and the only heat will be the thin blanket you'll be sleeping under. You see a few others rising as well, gathering their things and bidding quiet goodnights to their friends. The conversation has now completely faded, replaced by the soft shuffling of feet and the rustle of clothing. You're heading to your small sleeping space, which might be a small corner in the hall itself or a shared room with other servants. It's not a palace, but it's warm enough, and it's a place to rest. The candle clock has done its job. It has guided you not with a demanding bell or a buzzing alarm, but with a gentle flickering light and a soft little chime. It's a quiet promise that the day is done and a time for rest has arrived. And you, for one, are very ready to keep that promise. The candle clock, remember, was a guide, not a tyrant. Now that the pin has fallen, you're free to begin the nightly rituals of a medieval person living in a castle. Your job is done, your duties are fulfilled for the day, and the night belongs to you and to the guards. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact: the role of the castle's night watchman. His duties were directly tied to the passing of time, but not necessarily a candle clock. The night watchman's primary job was to patrol the castle's walls, check for intruders, and ensure all was secure. But he also had a secondary and very important role: to call out the time. He would do this by shouting out the hours as they passed, often using a bell or horn to punctuate his calls. Midnight and all is well, you might hear him cry, his voice echoing eerily through the cold stone corridors. This was the castle's public announcement system, a human clock that everyone relied on. You can imagine the night watchman's routine. He would start his rounds as soon as the sun went down, a cold lantern in his hand. He would trudge along the battlements, the wind whipping at his face, checking the gates and the portcullis. He would have his own way of telling time, perhaps by the position of the stars or the moon, or maybe by a simple water clock that he would have access to in his small guard room. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some watchmen were known to have their own little songs or rhymes they would use to call out the time, a kind of medieval radio station that would broadcast reassurance and a sense of order to the castle's inhabitants. Imagine hearing a guard's melodic, slightly off-key voice announcing 2 hours past midnight. All's quiet, all's still. It would be a comforting sound, a human presence in the cold, dark silence of the night. Historians still argue whether the night watchman's job was considered a prestigious position or a punishment. On the one hand, he was a key figure in the castle's security, a trusted guard with a great deal of responsibility. On the other hand, it was a lonely, cold, and often boring job, standing watch for hours in the bitter cold. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a job for a man who could be trusted, but who also had a certain kind of solemn, quiet temperament. The night watchman was the physical embodiment of the candle clock, a human timer that would burn all through the night until the sun, the ultimate timekeeper, rose again. So, as you finally make your way to your sleeping quarters, you can relax, knowing that the castle is safe, and that the night watchman is on his rounds, keeping a watchful eye on the sleeping household. You've done your part for the day, and now it's his turn to do his. The rhythm of the castle is a beautiful, intricate dance of duties, and you're just one small, tired dancer in the grand, sleepy choreography. With the first pin fallen and the night watchman's cries beginning to echo in the distance, you finally make your way to your sleeping space. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that might surprise you. Sleep in the medieval castle wasn't a single continuous stretch. It was a practice called segmented sleep, where you'd sleep for a few hours, wake up for an hour or two, and then go back to sleep until morning. This was an accepted normal part of life, and the hours in between were used for everything from prayer and contemplation to stoking the fire, or even visiting a neighbor. This is a far cry from our modern obsession with 8 straight hours of uninterrupted rest. The flickering candle clock was perfectly suited for this rhythm, its slow burn a gentle reminder that the night was still young, and there would be another time to rest before dawn. This practice of segmented sleep was a quirky or fringe tidbit for some, but a daily reality for many. You can imagine the quiet, intimate hours of the night. You'd wake up naturally, your body rested from the first sleep, and for an hour or so you'd be awake in the dark. Maybe you'd quietly check on a child, or simply sit by the fire, letting your mind wander. There was no pressure to be productive, no anxiety about losing sleep. It was just a natural part of the human cycle, a quiet, personal time that existed between the duties of the day and the duties of the morning. Historians still argue whether this pattern of sleep was biological or a product of the social environment, a response to a world without artificial light. Did our ancestors' bodies naturally fall into this pattern? Or did the lack of electricity and the constant threat of danger simply make it a necessity? It's a fascinating thought, one that might help you find peace with your own sleepless nights. Your sleeping arrangements, of course, depend entirely on your station in life. A high-ranking knight or a lord's family might have their own private chamber, complete with a massive, curtained four-poster bed. This wasn't just for comfort. The curtains helped to keep out drafts and preserve a little bit of body heat. You, however, a humble servant, will likely be sleeping in the Great Hall itself, or perhaps in a small shared room with others. You'll unroll your bedroll, a simple straw mattress covered with a woolen blanket, and find a spot by a wall, away from the drafts. There's a certain communal intimacy to this, a shared vulnerability as the entire castle settles down for the night. You can hear the soft snores of your fellow servants and the occasional shifting of a dog in its sleep. The fire in the hearth is now a dying ember, and the only light comes from the small candle clock you carried with you, its flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. It's a peaceful, quiet, and strangely comforting end to a long day. The candle clock, its gentle burn a silent promise of the morning, is the last thing you see before you close your eyes and drift into that first deep sleep. While you are sleeping your first sleep, a different rhythm entirely is playing out just outside the castle walls, in the quiet, sacred stone of the nearby monastery. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Monks and nuns operated on a much more rigid and precise schedule, dictated not by the sun, but by a series of bells that rang out the canonical hours. These were a series of fixed times for prayer and worship, and they gave the monastery a ticking, almost mechanical sense of time, even without clocks. The bells were the heartbeat of the monastic day, and their chimes would have been a constant, if distant, presence for everyone in the surrounding area. The monks would wake up in the dead of night for a service called matins, their first prayer of the day. This would be a few hours after sunset, in that quiet period when the rest of the world was in its deep, first sleep. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the monastery's abbot would often have his own, more precise timekeeping device, likely a water clock, to ensure that the bells rang at exactly the right time. A water clock, or clepsydra, worked by having water drip at a constant rate from one vessel to another, and the level of the water would tell the time. It was an ancient invention, and far more accurate than a candle. But it was also expensive and difficult to maintain. It was a luxury of the church, a symbol of their dedication to a precise and holy rhythm. Historians still argue whether the monastic schedule, with its constant bells and interrupted sleep, was considered a form of penance or a source of spiritual comfort. On the one hand, it was a harsh and demanding routine, a constant reminder of one's devotion. On the other hand, it provided a sense of order and purpose, a clear and unwavering path through the chaos of the medieval world. For the monks, the bells weren't just a signal to pray. They were a call to community, a reminder that they were all working together on a single sacred purpose. You can imagine the sound of the bells ringing out through the cold night air, a beautiful and lonely sound that would have cut through the darkness and announced to everyone, "Here we are. We are praying. We are watching." But for you, nestled in your bedroll in the Great Hall, the monastery bells are just a distant, muffled sound, a quiet part of the night's soundtrack. You are not bound by their schedule. You are free to sleep your two sleeps, to wake up in the middle of the night and simply be, and to go back to sleep until the rooster crows and the first light of dawn spills through the windows. The candle clock, its small flame a soft glow by your side, has done its job. It has marked the passage of time without a demanding, ringing bell, and it has allowed you to find your own natural rhythm. It is a time for personal quiet, a time for the castle to breathe, and a time for you to truly, finally rest. As you settle deeper into your bedroll, the candle clock flickers softly beside you. The Great Hall, now almost silent, is a completely different place than it was during the day. This quiet time, lit by the pale glow of candlelight, was a precious resource for some members of the castle. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. The candle clock was a crucial tool for the castle's scribes and scholars. For them, time wasn't just for rest, it was for study. In a world where books were painstakingly copied by hand and knowledge was a precious commodity, the hours after sunset were often the only time a scribe had to work in peace and quiet. Imagine the scene. A scribe, hunched over a heavy parchment scroll, a quill in his hand, a small, carefully marked candle clock on his desk. He's working on a manuscript, perhaps a chronicle of the Lord's deeds or a religious text. His work is slow, deliberate, and requires intense focus. The candle clock is his silent partner, a way to keep track of the hours without having to constantly look up at the stars or listen for a distant bell. He can set a pin to fall at a certain time, a gentle reminder that it's time to stop and rest his tired eyes, or to signal that he has reached a certain milestone in his work. The gentle tink of the pin would be a welcome sound, a quiet victory in a long night of labor. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some scribes would have their own special, highly detailed candle clocks. They might have a series of pins, each one marking a specific task. One for when to stop writing the main text, another for when to start adding the intricate illustrations and illuminations, and a third for when to prepare the next day's ink. They were masters of their own time, carving out a personal schedule within the broader, more communal rhythm of the castle. Historians still argue whether this late-night work was a sign of a scribe's dedication to his craft, or a necessity born of the constant distractions and demands of the daytime castle life. Was it a choice to work at night, or was it the only way to get anything done? You can almost hear the soft scratching of his quill on the parchment, the sound of a page turning, and the occasional sigh of a man deep in thought. The air in his small room would be thick with the smell of ink and old paper, a world away from the smells of wood smoke and roasting meat in the great hall. And you, in your bedroll, are a part of that world, a quiet observer of the castle's many rhythms. The scribe, the night watchman, and the humble servant, each person has their own relationship with time, their way of measuring the moments between sunset and sunrise. And the candle clock, in its own quiet way, is a common thread that runs through all of them, a soft, flickering reminder that the day is done and the night has arrived. You close your eyes, and in the quiet darkness, you can still feel the gentle, rhythmic burn of the candle clock beside you, a silent promise of a full night's rest. The castle has a different kind of quiet now, a deep, sleepy hush that settles over the stone and wood. But before this tranquil peace descended, there was the evening meal, a crucial part of the day's rhythm that was announced, not by a clock, but by a sound and a smell. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Mealtimes in the medieval castle were far more casual than our modern regimented schedules. Dinner, the main meal of the day, was typically served in the late afternoon or early evening, a time that was announced by the clanging of a bell or the call of a servant, not by a specific hour on a clock. It was a time for communal gathering, a moment to break bread, share stories, and simply be together. You can almost smell it now, the rich, savory scent of roasted boar or a thick vegetable stew wafting from the kitchens. This was the signal that it was time to eat, and it was a universal call. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that in some castles, a specific musical horn would be blown to announce the meal. Each horn had its own distinct sound, so the inhabitants of the castle would know immediately if it was time for a feast in the Great Hall, or a more intimate meal in the Lord's private chambers. It was a clever, low-tech way to communicate a very important message, and it added a touch of pomp and ceremony to an otherwise simple event. Historians still argue whether these casual mealtimes were a sign of a more relaxed, communal lifestyle, or if they were just a necessity born of the unpredictability of medieval life. After all, a hunter might return with a deer at an unexpected time, or a cook might need a few extra hours to prepare a banquet. Did the lack of a rigid schedule make people more flexible and adaptable? Or did it create a kind of constant, low-level anxiety about when the next meal would actually arrive? It's a good thing to ponder as you lie in your bedroll, full from the evening meal and ready for a good long sleep. The candle clock is burning steadily, a quiet little metronome that is ticking away the minutes until your second sleep. The memories of the evening meal are a comforting presence in the darkness. You remember the laughter and the chatter, the clinking of tankards and the feeling of warmth from the fire. Now all that is gone, replaced by the deep resonant silence of a sleeping castle. The candle clock is a quiet, steady reminder that the night is passing, but it's a gentle reminder, not a demanding one. It's not telling you to rush or hurry. It's just telling you that the night is yours, a time for rest and dreams. And you, for one, are very ready to oblige. The candle clock, that humble, flickering light, was more than just a timekeeper. It was, in some cases, a rudimentary safety device. This brings us to a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some castles would use a modified candle clock to act as a fire alarm. Imagine a candle with a pin placed near its base, but instead of the pin falling into a metal holder, it was connected to a thin string. This string, in turn, was tied to a small, loose bundle of kindling, or a dried bellflower hanging precariously above a basin of water. As the candle burned down to the pin, the string would snap, and the bundle would drop with a loud plop into the water. It was an ingenious, if slightly unreliable, way to alert the night watchman to a potential fire risk, or simply to wake up the household in the event of an emergency. Of course, this system wasn't foolproof. A sudden draft could cause the flame to burn erratically, snapping the string prematurely and sending the kindling into the water with a false alarm. Or even worse, a draft could extinguish the flame altogether, rendering the entire system useless. This is a mainstream historical fact. Fires were a constant, terrifying threat in medieval castles, which were made mostly of wood, thatch, and other flammable materials. The night watchman's patrols were not just to look for intruders, but also to watch for the telltale glow of a fire in a servant's quarters or a stable. The candle clock, in its most basic form, was a small personal tool, but in its more elaborate versions, it was a piece of the castle's larger, and much more precarious, security system. Historians still argue whether these fire alarm candle clocks were a common feature or a rare invention of a particularly paranoid lord. Was it a widespread practice, or was it a one-off experiment that never caught on? You can imagine the kind of person who would invent such a device, a cautious, anxious sort. A person who couldn't sleep soundly unless they had a backup plan for their backup plan. And you can also imagine the frustration of the servants who would be woken up in the middle of the night by a false alarm, a wet plop echoing through the great hall. But for you, in your bedroll, the only sound is the gentle crackle of the fire's dying embers and the occasional sigh from a sleeping neighbor. The candle clock you have beside you is a simple one, with no strings or kindling attached. It is just a silent, steady companion, a soft light in the darkness. You close your eyes, content in the knowledge that the night is passing slowly and that you have a full, uninterrupted night of segmented sleep ahead of you. The castle is quiet, the guards are on their rounds, and the gentle flame of the candle is a soft, warm promise of a peaceful night. You are deep into your first sleep, a heavy, dreamless slumber. But somewhere in the castle, the rhythm of the night continues. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. The castle's grand bell in the tower was the most important timekeeper of all. While the candle clock was a personal quiet device, the bell was a public one. It rang at specific, predetermined intervals, often every 3 hours, to announce the change of the night watches. It was the castle's official clock, a loud, booming declaration that a quarter of the night had passed, and a new group of guards was taking their place on the battlements. The ringing of the bell was a sound that would have cut through the thick stone walls and echoed throughout the surrounding countryside. It was a signal of order and vigilance, a constant reminder that the castle was awake and watching even while its inhabitants slept. For the guards, it was a practical signal, a call to duty. For the peasants in the village below, it was a sound of reassurance, a sign that the Lord was protecting them from harm. And for you, in your bedroll, it was a part of the night's soundtrack, a deep, resonant hum that would momentarily stir you from your sleep before you fell back into a heavy rest. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that each castle's bell had a unique sound and ringing pattern, a kind of sonic signature that would have been instantly recognizable to anyone living in its shadow. Some might have a single long toll, while others might have a series of quick chimes. It was a form of communication, a code that everyone in the region understood. Historians still argue whether the bell was a source of comfort or a source of anxiety. Was it a beautiful, resonant sound that lulled people to sleep, a promise of safety and protection? Or was it a harsh, demanding sound that constantly reminded people of the dangers of the world outside the castle walls? It's a good question to ponder as you lie in your bedroll, and you can almost hear that deep, resonant sound in the back of your mind. But for now, you are safe, warm and well-fed, and the only clock that matters is the one burning slowly beside you. The candle clock is a quiet, gentle timekeeper that works on your schedule, not on the rigid, booming schedule of the castle bell. It's a personal, intimate timekeeper in a world of loud public ones, and you're grateful for its peaceful, silent rhythm. The night is long and the candle has a long way to go, so you close your eyes and let yourself drift back to sleep. You stir, and the waking is not a jarring event, but a slow, gentle surfacing from the deep ocean of your first sleep. It's a natural, unhurried rising that feels less like an interruption and more like a designated pause in the grand silent symphony of the night. The Great Hall is now a vastly different creature than it was in the bustling evening. The roaring fire that had been a sun at the center of your world has surrendered, leaving behind only a bed of deep orange and crimson coals that pulse with a soft residual life. They breathe a faint, shimmering heat into the immediate air, but beyond their reach, a profound cold has seeped into the very bones of the castle stone. You can feel it on your exposed cheek, a clean, sharp chill that speaks of the deep, star-dusted night outside. The silence is no longer merely an absence of noise. It has become a presence in itself, a heavy velvet cloak draped over everything. It is so complete that you can hear the faint, whisper-thin hiss of your own breath and the slow, rhythmic thump of your heart against your ribs. Your eyes find the candle clock, your steadfast companion through these dark hours. The flame, once a proud, bright spear, is now lower, a soft, rounded teardrop of light that trembles with every imperceptible current in the hall. It has consumed more than half of its waxy fuel, its progress a silent, visual testament to the night's passage. As you watch its gentle, hypnotic dance, your mind, adrift in this quiet moment, drifts to other ways of tracking this invisible flow. This brings you to a mainstream historical fact. The candle, for all its simple reliability, was not the only method of timekeeping indoors. In the more prestigious and well-equipped strongholds, particularly those with access to a reliable water source and the wealth to support high craftsmanship, a far more ancient and sophisticated device was used: the water clock, or clepsydra. The water clock was a marvel of ancient engineering, a technology that felt closer to magic than to simple mechanics. Its principles reached back through the Romans and Greeks to the great civilizations of Persia and Egypt. Unlike the candle, which measured time by consumption and decay, the clepsydra measured it by accumulation and flow. In its most basic form, it was an elegant solution. A vessel, often made of stone or metal, was filled with water. At its base, a tiny, precisely drilled hole allowed the water to escape, drop by drop, at a near constant rate into a second vessel below. Lines marked on the interior of this receiving vessel would indicate the passage of the hours as the water level steadily rose. It was a liquid hourglass, a captive river that mirrored the inexorable flow of time itself, or a monastery seeking to regulate its canonical hours with divine precision, or a royal court wishing to display its mastery over the natural world. The clepsydra was the ultimate expression of order and control. Yet, it is the quirky or fringe tidbits about the more elaborate water clocks that truly capture the medieval imagination. These were not mere instruments. They were automata, complex theatrical displays powered by the patient drip of water. You can almost picture one in the private chamber of a great lord, a magnificent creation of brass and polished wood. As the water rises in the lower basin, it lifts afloat, which is connected by a series of fine chains and gears to a miniature stage. At the top of the hour, a lever is tripped. A tiny brass knight, resplendent in engraved armor, might emerge from a castle gate, his arm lifting to strike a small silver bell with his lance, a clear, sweet tink that would cut through the chamber's silence. Some were even more wondrous, with rotating dials that showed the phases of the moon or figures of angels that would turn and bow. To the common person, such a device would be indistinguishable from sorcery, a testament to the owner's almost supernatural wealth and power. It wasn't just telling time, it was commanding it, making it perform. This contrast leads to the very heart of what historians still argue about these devices. Was the water clock, with its mechanical complexity, truly seen as a superior timekeeper, or was its primary function that of a status symbol, its fussiness tolerated for its prestige? The evidence is compelling on both sides. On one hand, its accuracy, when properly maintained, was unmatched by the flickering candle. It was immune to drafts and offered a consistent, repeatable measure of the hour. Yet, that maintenance was its great weakness. The water had to be clean, free of sediment that could clog the delicate aperture. It was susceptible to freezing in the bitter cold of an unheated stone room, rendering it useless. It required a skilled artisan to calibrate and repair its intricate parts. A candle, by contrast, was portable, cheap, and easily understood. You lit it, and it burned. One was a tool of the institution, a symbol of power and control. The other was a tool of the individual, a personal, quiet measure of a life's passing moments. You pull your woolen blanket tighter, the thought of such complex machinery feeling alien and distant in your simple, quiet reality. For you, here in the Great Hall, time is not a rising column of water or a knight striking a bell. It is the slow, organic shortening of a wax candle. It is the feeling of rest in your bones and the growing cold in the air. The candle clock doesn't announce the hour with a chime. It simply exists within it, a soft, warm promise of the eventual dawn. You feel the gentle pull of sleep calling you back to its depths, and you willingly surrender. The clepsydra can keep its precise, watery vigil for the monks and kings. You have your humble flame, and for now, that is more than enough. Just as your consciousness begins to dissolve back into the welcoming depths of sleep, a sound, faint but distinct, catches the edge of your hearing. It's a sound that should not belong to the soft, sleeping world of the night. It is a quiet, rhythmic, and insistent tap, 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 the sound of metal on metal, yet muted and controlled. It seems to come from the direction of the Bailey, where the armory and smithy are located. It's a sound that speaks of wakeful work, of a focus that defies the darkness. This brings you to a mainstream historical fact. The life of a castle was a cycle of use and repair, and nowhere was this truer than for its arms and armor. The deafening clang of the blacksmith's forge, the true birthplace of weapons, was a creature of the day. But the armorer, the meticulous custodian of that deadly craft, often performed his most detailed work in the profound quiet of the night. A dented helm, a stiffened gauntlet joint, or a patch of insidious rust on a breastplate were not trivial imperfections. They were invitations to disaster, weaknesses a perceptive enemy could exploit. Maintenance was survival. You can almost picture the scene, your mind painting it in the deep hues of the night. The armory is a cave of cold iron and deep shadows, smelling of quenching oil, beeswax, and the sharp mineral scent of a whetstone. A single lantern or a thick tallow candle, its light more precious here than anywhere, throws a small golden circle of clarity onto a workbench. Within that circle, the armorer toils. He is a man of immense patience and powerful calloused hands, his face a mask of concentration. He isn't hammering with the wild abandon of the forge. He is using a small, rounded hammer and a shaped wooden block, gently, skillfully persuading a dent out of a knight's pauldron. The tap, tap, tap is the sound of that persuasion. The room is a silent testament to organized violence. Racks of chainmail hauberks hang like limp, steel ghosts, and motionless helms stare from shelves with empty eyes, and disembodied steel limbs, greaves, vambraces, and cuisses lie in waiting for their human counterparts. The armorer moves among them not as a warrior, but as a physician tending to his steel patients. In this quiet space, the armorer engages in rituals that verge on alchemy, and here we find a quirky or fringe tidbit of the craft. After the repairs are made, the steel must be protected. You watch in your mind's eye as he prepares his polishing paste. He takes the finest soot, scraped from the inside of the smithy's chimney, and mixes it with a dollop of rendered tallow, the very same fat that fuels the common candle. He works the greasy black mixture in a small wooden bowl until it is a smooth, consistent paste. This humble concoction is the secret to a mirror-like shine and, more importantly, a protective layer against the creeping damp that is the armor's greatest foe. He applies it with a soft deerskin rag, rubbing in slow, deliberate circles. The process is meditative, transformative. It is an act of care that goes beyond mere function. He is not just polishing steel. He is giving it a second skin, a final blessing of resilience before it must once again face the chaos of battle. The final gleam that catches the candlelight is his signature, a mark of pride in a silent, solitary craft. This solitary work places the armorer in a fascinating position within the castle's world, leading to a debate that historians still ponder. What was his true social standing? On one hand, he was an indispensable artisan. The life of the lord and his knights depended directly on his skill. A master armorer, especially in the great cities of Milan or Augsburg, was a celebrated artist. His makers mark a guarantee of unparalleled quality, his creations worth a fortune. Yet the castle's live-in armorer was often a different case. He was not an independent master, but a servant, albeit a highly skilled one. He was bound to the castle's hierarchy, his status defined by his utility to the lord. Was he seen as a high-ranking craftsman, consulted and respected for his vital knowledge? Or was he simply a smith, a man of soot and sweat, whose proximity to the forge and the grime of his work kept him firmly in the lower echelons of the social order? The rhythmic tapping continues, a quiet pulse that underscores the dual nature of your world. The Great Hall, with its dying fire and sleeping bodies, is a place of community, of home. But this sound is a reminder that the castle is also a fortress, a machine of war. The armorer's work is the sound of that machine being maintained. It is a sound that is simultaneously reassuring, a sign that your defenses are strong and ready, and deeply unsettling, a quiet admission of the ever-present dangers that make such defenses a constant necessity. It is the counterpoint to the work of the baker or the brewer, whose efforts sustain life. The armorer's work is to preserve life by preparing for its violent end. You pull your blanket tighter, the metallic whisper a final, fading sound as sleep reclaims you, a quiet reminder of the cold, hard steel that guards your soft, warm dreams. The metallic rhythm of the armorer's work finally fades, and your mind slips once more toward the peaceful abyss of sleep. But the silence that follows is not empty. It is punctured by a new sound, one that travels with a different kind of urgency. It's a small, dry cough followed by a fretful whimper. The sound is fragile, human, and achingly vulnerable, seeming to emanate from one of the small family chambers branching off the Great Hall. It's a sound that instantly slices through any romantic notion of the castle as an impregnable fortress, reminding you that its stone walls are powerless against the timeless enemies of fever and plague. This brings you to a mainstream historical fact. In an era before modern medicine, sickness was a constant and intimate companion, and the night was its favored dominion. It was in the long, dark hours, when the body's defenses were low, that fevers often climbed to their perilous peak. The castle's healer, therefore, was a nocturnal creature, a keeper of a quiet and desperate vigil when the rest of the household slept. Your mind, prompted by that small, sad sound, drifts into that chamber. It's a small space dominated by a simple wooden bed. The air within is close and thick, heavy with the cloying sweetness of sickness, the sharp tang of sweat, and something else, the clean, aromatic scent of herbs. A small fire, little more than a pile of glowing embers, provides a weak, flickering light and a pocket of warmth against the room's pervasive chill. Kneeling by the bed is a figure, likely an older woman, the castle's healer. She is not a physician in the modern sense. Her knowledge comes not from dusty university texts, but from a lineage of observation, an oral library of wisdom passed from mother to daughter. She's a herbalist, a midwife, a counselor, a fulcrum of life and death. Her face, etched with the lines of countless vigils, is calm as she dips a cloth into a bowl of cool water and gently bathes the forehead of the feverish child on the bed. Her time is not measured by a clock, but by the shallow, rapid breaths of her patient. In her practice, time itself is a primary ingredient, leading to the quirky or fringe tidbit of her craft, the steeping clock. Hanging from the low rafters of her own small room are bunches of dried plants, a fragrant apothecary of the surrounding fields and forest. Yarrow for staunching blood, chamomile for calming humors, willow bark for easing pain, and mint for settling a turbulent stomach. When preparing a remedy, she relies on instinct and experience to measure its infusion. Three-leaf steep, where she watches 3 specific leaves unfurl and surrender their essence to the hot water, might be the measure for a simple calming draught. A more potent brew for breaking the fever might require a full dark steep, where the water must become so infused with herbs that it turns as dark as the night sky outside. It is a timekeeping of patience and transformation, of watching and waiting for the subtle energies of the natural world to be released. This clock is biological, alchemical, and deeply intuitive, a far cry from the mechanical drip of a clepsydra or the steady burn of your candle. The healer's vital role, however, placed her in a precarious position, the subject of a debate that still engages historians. Was she a universally revered figure, cherished for her indispensable ability to soothe pain and shepherd new life into the world? Or was she a figure of suspicion and fear, her power making her vulnerable to accusations of a darker source? She walked a razor's edge. Her successes were often attributed to the grace of God or the resilience of the patient. But her failures could have dire consequences. If a child worsened under her care, or a difficult birth ended in tragedy, whispers could begin. Her knowledge of herbs, her muttered words of comfort over a steaming pot, her solitary walks in the woods to gather ingredients, all could be twisted and reinterpreted through the lens of superstition. In an age when misfortune was often seen as the result of malice, the woman who held the secrets of life and death in her hands was an easy target for blame. She was both a beacon of hope and a potential scapegoat. The child's coughing subsides, replaced by a softer, more regular breathing. A small victory in the long war of the night. You imagine the healer adjusting the blankets, her movements economical and full of a quiet competence. Her power is a profound contrast to the Lord's. He commands with a sword and the force of arms, His power loud, public, and built on a foundation of steel. Her power is quiet, private, and rooted in the earth itself. It is the power to mend, not to break, to soothe, not to conquer. You realize that the castle's survival depends equally on both. The armorer preparing for the violence of men, and the healer fighting the silent violence of nature. As the thought settles, you feel the tension in your own shoulders release. The fragility you heard in that cough is being met with a strength that is just as real as the stone walls around you. A quiet peace settles over you and you drift back to sleep, carried on the gentle, invisible tide of the healer's patient, watchful care. The quiet peace left by the healer's vigil slowly settles over you, a comforting blanket in the cold hall. But the night is a tapestry of many textures, and a new sound soon makes itself known, traveling on the cold drafts that snake under the heavy doors from the outer bailey. It's a different sort of sound, not human, but animal and deeply primal. First, a low, guttural whimper, then the sharp, metallic jangle of a chain, followed by a muffled woof that sounds thick with sleep. It is the sound of the Lord's hounds, dreaming in their kennels. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. In the world of the medieval nobility, hunting hounds were far more than mere animals. They were living, breathing extensions of the Lord's power, indispensable tools for the hunt, and potent symbols of aristocratic status. Great breeds, towering Irish wolfhounds for bringing down formidable prey, sleek greyhounds for breathtaking pursuits, and tenacious elands for gripping and holding, were bred, trained, and cared for with a level of dedication and expense that could rival the upkeep of a squadron of men-at-arms. Your mind's eye travels to the kennels, a long, low-roofed building of stone and timber. The smell here is rich and earthy, the sharp ammonia of urine, the dry sweetness of clean straw, the musky scent of dog, and a faint coppery tang of old blood that clings to the air, a ghost of the last hunt. In the gloom, you see them, a sprawling, breathing pile of canine muscle and wiry fur. They are deep in the grip of their own nocturnal dramas, their legs twitching, their paws paddling at the air as they chase phantom stags through the dream forests of their minds. They are a pack, a weapon sleeping now, but their potential for sudden coordinated violence is a palpable presence in the stillness. The health and readiness of this pack were paramount, a direct reflection of the Lord's own vitality and his dominion over the surrounding lands. To lose a prized hound was not just a financial loss, it was a blow to his prestige. This constant need for readiness leads to the quirky or fringe tidbit of the kennel master, the man who lived and breathed the rhythm of the pack. His duties did not end at sunset. He might be required to make a round in the dead of night, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows as he moved among his charges. He carried not a candle clock, but an internal one, tuned to the needs of the animals. He knew which young dog was prone to anxious whining and needed a low, reassuring word. He knew the alpha, the great, scarred leader of the pack, who would lift his head and watch the master's every move with intelligent, knowing eyes before settling again with a sigh. The master would check their water troughs, ensuring they hadn't frozen over, and rearrange the straw for a dog that had kicked its bedding away. He was the pack's nocturnal guardian, his relationship with them a complex language of scent, sound, and a deep instinctual understanding that transcended the master-servant dynamic seen elsewhere in the castle. This complex relationship is at the heart of a question historians still explore. What was the true nature of the bond between a medieval noble and his hounds? Was it a genuine companionship, a deep-seated affection for a loyal animal, or was it a purely utilitarian relationship, where the dog's value was calculated in terms of its speed, strength and ferocity in the hunt? The evidence is intriguingly split. On one side, you have countless examples of affection. Knights had their favorite hounds carved at their feet on their tomb effigies, a final, eternal statement of companionship. Epic poems and romances are filled with tales of heroes who mourn the loss of their faithful dogs as they would a human friend. Yet, the brutal pragmatism of the age offers a stark counterpoint. Hunting manuals speak coldly of culling hounds that were too old, too slow, or disobedient. A dog that failed in the hunt, that shied away from a charging boar, could be cast aside or put down without a second thought. It was, perhaps, a conditional love, deep and true, but only as long as the animal fulfilled its noble, violent purpose. The sound of the dreaming dogs, a mixture of soft whimpers and gruff snorts, weaves itself into the fabric of your own half-sleep. It's a profound reminder of the wildness that the castle contains, a wildness that it simultaneously nurtures and controls. The hounds are a bridge between the structured human world within the walls and the untamed wilderness that lies beyond them. They represent a raw, instinctual energy that the nobility admires and channels into the highly ritualized violence of the hunt. For you, a humble servant, their dreams are of a freedom and ferocity you can barely imagine. As you drift deeper into sleep, their phantom chase is the last thing you perceive. A silent, furious pursuit happening just beyond your awareness, a primal heartbeat within the greater, sleeping body of the castle. The primal, dream-fueled sounds from the kennels fade into the ever-present hum of the night, and you sink again towards true slumber. Yet, in this heightened state of awareness, where sleep and waking blur, your senses are attuned to the smallest disturbances. Your focus pulls away from the grand, distant courtyard and draws inward to the vast, shadowed cavern of the great hall itself. A flicker of movement, so slight it might have been imagined, catches your eye near the edge of the hearth's dying glow. It is not the wavering of a shadow cast by your own candle, but something more deliberate, more alive. You hold your breath, your eyes straining in the gloom, and then you see it again. A low, sleek shape detaching itself from the deeper darkness beneath a trestle table, moving with a liquid silence that is utterly captivating. It is the castle's mouser, one of the feline guardians of the hall, and it is on the hunt. This introduces a mainstream historical fact that is as grim as it is essential. A medieval castle, for all its stone grandeur, was in a state of perpetual, undeclared war with an insidious and numberless enemy: vermin. Rats and mice were not merely a nuisance. They were a dire threat, capable of spoiling vast quantities of grain in the storerooms, gnawing through essential materials, and most terrifyingly, acting as vectors for the very diseases that could bring a kingdom to its knees. The hunt you are now witnessing is a world away from the noble, boisterous pursuit of the Lord's hounds. That is a hunt of spectacle and sport. This is a hunt of necessity, a silent, grim affair waged in the forgotten corners and dark spaces of your world. The cat is the castle's secret champion, its nocturnal soldier in this vital, unglamorous war. You watch, mesmerized by its focus. Every muscle in its body is controlled, its movements a masterpiece of patient economy. It glides, belly low to the cold flagstones, placing each paw with surgical precision to make no sound. Its destination is a dark patch near the wall where the stones are uneven, a place where a faint, almost imperceptible skittering sound betrays the presence of its quarry. The cat freezes, becoming a statue of pure potential energy, its entire being narrowed to a single point of lethal concentration. Its clock is not the sun or a candle. It is the clock of instinct, of infinite patience, measured in the long, silent heartbeats between the praise movement and the perfect moment to strike. This reliance on a feline patrol leads to the quirky or fringe tidbit of the de facto cat keeper. While no formal title might exist, it was often an unspoken duty of a kitchen maid or a scullery boy to look after these valuable hunters. They would be responsible for leaving out a small saucer of milk or water, just enough to keep the cat loyal to the area, but never so much as to dull its hunting appetite. They would ensure the mouser wasn't accidentally shut out of the granary or pantry at nightfall, the very places its services were most required. In some castles, a human rat catcher was employed, a grim, solitary figure who worked with small, fierce terriers, ferrets, and a grim array of wooden traps. He was paid by the tail, his success measured in a grim, grisly tally. But the cat was the superior hunter for the domestic spaces, quieter, more subtle, and capable of operating independently in the silent hours when its human counterparts were fast asleep. The cat's role, however, highlights a deep-seated ambiguity in the medieval mind, a source of ongoing discussion for historians: the contradictory status of the cat itself. On the one hand, its utility was undeniable. Account books from manors and abbeys sometimes show small expenditures for the purchase or care of mousing cats, recognizing them as a tangible asset, a form of biological pest control. They were working animals, valued for their contribution to the health and security of the household. On the other hand, cats, particularly black ones, were steeped in superstition. Their silent, nocturnal nature, their perceived independence, and their unnervingly intelligent, glowing eyes linked them in the popular imagination to witchcraft, paganism, and the devil. A cat could be praised for dropping a dead rat at the cook's feet in the morning, yet be hissed at and shooed away that same evening as a potential bad omen or a witch familiar in disguise. It was both a guardian and a specter, a creature that walked the line between the familiar world of the hearth and the uncanny world of shadows. You watch as the cat finally explodes from its stillness in a blur of speed and precision, disappearing into the darkness. There is no sound of struggle, only a faint, abrupt squeak that is instantly silenced. The hunter returns to the edge of the firelight, its prey held firmly in its jaws, and gives you a brief, inscrutable glance with eyes that seem to hold all the secrets of the night. In that moment, you feel a strange kinship. You, too, are a quiet, watchful presence, your labor essential but often invisible to the great and powerful. You are both servants of the castle, performing the necessary, uncelebrated tasks that allow the grander narrative of knights and ladies to unfold. The cat's hunt is a stark reminder that the greatest threats are not always the armies thundering at the gates, but the quiet decay and disease that can rot a fortress from within. With a final, silent nod to its feline counterpart, you let your eyes close, a newfound respect for the silent, unseen guardians of your sleeping world. The image of the silent hunting cat fades, leaving you with a lingering thought of the unseen worlds that coexist with your own. Your mind has traced the castle's hidden life, from the armorer's solitary work to the healer's quiet vigil, from the dreams of noble hounds to the grim necessities of the mouser. Now, in the profound stillness of the night, your imagination takes one final chilling plunge. It travels downwards, past the sleeping servants, below the kitchens with their cooling ovens and the storerooms with their precious sacks of grain, down through the very foundations of the castle, into the cold, damp earth held captive by stone. It descends into the place that is defined by its absolute absence of light, the dungeon. This brings you to a grim, mainstream historical fact. The dungeon or keep was an integral part of most castles, a place not just for punishment but for the strategic containment of threats. Here, A spectrum of humanity was held. A rival knight awaiting a handsome ransom, a political hostage used as leverage, a common poacher awaiting judgment, or a suspected traitor whose secrets needed to be broken. For every one of them, the experience was defined by one common element: the deliberate and total annihilation of time as you know it. In this subterranean world, the rhythms that govern your life are meaningless. There is no sun or moon, no dawn or dusk. There is only a thick, suffocating blackness, a darkness so complete it feels like a physical weight pressing on the eyeballs. The only light is a fleeting, traumatic memory. The air itself is a foul entity, stagnant and heavy with the smells of unwashed bodies, human waste, creeping mold, and a deep, earthen despair that seems to have soaked into the very mortar. The silence, too, is of a different quality than the peaceful hush of the Great Hall. It is a dead silence, broken only by the maddeningly rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water seeping through stone, the frantic scuttling of the rats who are the true masters of this domain, and the sound of one's own breathing, harsh and loud in the suffocating quiet. Here, your little candle clock would not just be a luxury, it would be a miracle, a sun in a lightless universe. This leads to a quirky and deeply unsettling tidbit regarding the jailer's craft: the active weaponization of time. A jailer might keep his own records, a crude scratch of chalk on the outside of the heavy wooden door for each day that passed. But this was for his own accounting, not the prisoner's comfort. For the person within the cell, the only clock was the guard's unpredictable arrival. This event was the singular pivot point of their existence. The grinding scrape of a stone slab being moved, the squeal of rusted hinges, the sudden, blinding glare of a torch that seared the eyes, the hollow thud of a wooden bowl of thin gruel, and a chunk of stale bread on the damp floor. A prisoner might desperately try to build their own internal clock, counting their heartbeats into the thousands, whispering the verses of a psalm over and over, until the words lost all meaning. But the jailer, under orders or through simple cruelty, would shatter this fragile sanity by making his visits completely irregular. 2 visits in quick succession might be followed by an agonizingly long stretch of absolute nothingness, a void so long the prisoner would begin to doubt if they had been forgotten entirely, left to be consumed by the darkness. This was the core of the torture, not just the deprivation of light and comfort, but the destruction of the mind's ability to perceive sequence and duration. This deliberate practice fuels a stark debate among historians about the dungeon's primary role. Was it simply a place of containment, its horrific conditions merely an unfortunate but practical byproduct of its subterranean location and the limited resources of the age? Or was it, in many cases, a sophisticated instrument of psychological warfare? The containment argument points out that the deepest, most secure part of a castle was naturally lightless, damp, and isolated. The suffering was incidental to the primary goal of preventing escape. However, the psychological warfare argument points to the existence of purpose-built horrors like the oubliette, from the French oublier to forget, a narrow pit into which a prisoner was dropped with no possibility of exit. They point to the recorded use of temporal disorientation as a method for breaking a prisoner's will, for extracting a confession, or for simply neutralizing an enemy by erasing their sanity. In this view, the dungeon was not just a cage. It was a carefully calibrated machine designed to dismantle a human being. A profound, visceral chill, colder than any draft in the hall, seems to seep up from the flagstones beneath you. The simple warmth of your woolen blanket, the soft, steady glow of your candle clock, the very air you breathe, all suddenly feel like immense, unearned luxuries. The candle is no longer just a measure of your progress toward morning. It is a symbol of light, of order, of a sane and structured world. It is the antithesis of the cold, timeless, formless void that exists just a few dozen feet beneath you. You reflect on the terrifyingly thin line that separates your life from that of a prisoner. A lost battle, a lord's fickle wrath, a false accusation. The thought is a jolt of pure fear and profound gratitude. You close your eyes tightly, trying to banish the imagined darkness, and focus with all your might on the tiny, precious flame of your candle. A beacon of defiance against the crushing blackness you know is lurking in the heart of your stone home. Shaking the oppressive, chilling thought of the dungeon from your mind with a physical shudder, you force your consciousness upwards, away from the cold stone beneath. You deliberately steer your thoughts toward a warmer, brighter memory, back to the earlier hours of this very night, when the great hall was not a silent, cavernous tomb, but a vibrant, living heart. You remember the time just after the evening meal, a time for digestion and diversion, when the candle clock on the high table was not a solitary beacon, but just one of many lights in a room filled with human warmth. This brings you to a mainstream historical fact. In a world without modern mass media, live entertainment was not a luxury, but a vital social lubricant, a way to bind the community, disseminate news, and ease the tensions of a rigidly structured life. After the trenchers were cleared and the ale cups refilled, the hall would often be given over to a storyteller, a traveling minstrel, or the castle's own resident fool, the jester. You can almost feel the change in the atmosphere as your memory sharpens. The air, now cold and still, was then thick and hazy with wood smoke from the roaring central hearth, the savory scent of roasted meat, and the sweet yeasty smell of spilled ale. The silence, now so profound, was then a comfortable layered din. The murmur of dozens of conversations, the clatter of a dropped cup, the hearty laughter of a night, all underscored by the crackle and spit of the great fire. And the light, not the single lonely flame of your candle, but a multitude of flickering sources, tallow candles on the high table, smoking rushlights held in simple iron brackets along the walls, all working together to push back the darkness and create a generous, smoky, golden-hued world. Into this world would step the jester, a splash of chaotic color and sound. He wore his trade, motley, party-colored hose of clashing red and yellow, a tunic hung with bells that jingled with every movement, and on his head the iconic fool's cap with its floppy, ass-eared lappets. The jester's performance was a complex art, and here lies a quirky and fascinating tidbit about his craft. He was far more than a simple clown. His foolishness gave him a unique license to speak truths no one else dared. He would not just tell jokes. He would weave a tapestry of entertainment that could include acrobatic tumbles, skilled mimicry of the guests, and satirical songs played on a lute, with lyrics that cleverly commented on recent events. A key tool of his trade was the bauble or marotte, a small scepter topped with a carved jester's head. This was not just a prop, it was his alter ego. He could hold conversations with it, allowing the puppet to voice the most outrageous, insulting, or politically dangerous opinions, while the jester himself could feign innocence. "Don't blame me, my lord," he might cry. "It was the fool on the stick who said it." This allowed him to serve as a subtle barometer of the court's mood and a mouthpiece for dissent, all under the protected guise of insanity. This unique, protected role has led to a long-standing debate among historians regarding the jester's true influence. Was he merely a courtly safety valve, a harmless entertainer whose function was to release social pressure and amuse his betters, his words ultimately dismissed as the ramblings of a licensed fool? Or could he be a genuinely influential figure, a foolish advisor whose sharp wit and unique perspective gave him the Lord's ear in a way no formal counselor could ever achieve? Proponents of the safety valve theory argue that the jester's freedom was an illusion, granted only as long as his jokes didn't truly threaten the power structure. However, there is compelling evidence for the influential fool theory. Household accounts show that prominent jesters were often well paid, granted fine clothes, and afforded special privileges. In literature, from Shakespeare's King Lear to the tales of the famous jester till Eulenspiegel, the fool is consistently portrayed as the wisest character on stage, the only one who sees and speaks the unvarnished truth, while the wise men play their political games. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, dependent entirely on the individual fool's cleverness and the specific lord's temperament. You smile in the darkness, the memory a welcome warmth. You recall the jester's antics tonight, a particularly cutting joke about the cost of the lady's new gown that made the lord choke on his ale, while the lady herself tried to hide her smile. In that moment, the entire hall, from the highest noble to the lowest kitchen hand, was united in a single genuine laugh. All hierarchy, all worry, was momentarily erased. You realize now that no one was watching the candle clock during that time. Time was not being measured. It was being lived, filled with a communal joy that made it feel both fleeting and infinite. Now, the silence, the candle's steady, lonely consumption of itself, is the only event. It is the same candle, the same flame, but it is marking a completely different kind of time. It marks the time for community and the time for solitude, the time for laughter and the time for sober reflection. It is a silent witness to all the castle's varied moods, and recalling the joy it illuminated just hours ago makes its quiet companionship now feel less like loneliness and more like peace. The warm memory of communal laughter fades, leaving a soft and pleasant echo in your mind. The sharp fear of the dungeon has been successfully banished, replaced by a gentle nostalgia. As you lie in the deep and profound quiet of the hall, your mind becomes receptive to even fainter, more deeply buried sounds, or perhaps the memory of sounds. Your thoughts drift to the women's solar, the private sitting room of the lady and her attendants, or to a quiet, well-lit corner of this very hall from an earlier time. You can almost hear it now, a soft, steady, and hypnotic whir, the gentle hum of a spinning wheel turning chaos into order. This brings you to a mainstream historical fact of immense importance. Textile production was the bedrock of the medieval economy, and it was a domain overwhelmingly governed by women. From the richest lady to the humblest peasant girl, the ability to spin was a fundamental skill. Distaff work was a common synonym for female labor, a ceaseless and essential activity that clothed the entire castle, from the lord's finest tunic to the servant's simple shift. In your mind's eye, you see the scene clearly. A small group of women are gathered in an intimate circle of light cast by a cluster of beeswax candles, a luxury afforded by their station. The air around them is warm and smells faintly of lanolin from the clean wool, and perhaps of lavender from a sachet used to keep the linens fresh. Their hands are in constant, practiced motion. From the distaff, a staff holding the mass of carded wool, or rollags, they deftly draw out a thin, steady stream of fibers. Their other hand guides the yarn as the turning wheel introduces the crucial twist, the very action that imparts strength and transforms the fluffy, fragile fibers into durable thread. The newly spun yarn is wound neatly onto the spindle, growing steadily into a tight cone called a caup. Their movements are a kind of dance, a choreography passed down from mother to daughter, so ingrained it requires no conscious thought. The rhythmic hum of their wheels is the room's heartbeat, a sound of pure, quiet productivity. Within this female sphere, time and tasks were measured in their own unique ways, a quirky or fringed tidbit of domestic life. The women might use a simple marked candle as a collective work clock, agreeing to spin until the flame had consumed a certain portion, ensuring no one worked longer than her share on a communal project. But more organically, their time was often kept by song. They would sing together, ballads of tragic love, hymns, or simple, repetitive folk songs. This was not just to pass the time. The rhythm of the music would help regulate the speed of their treadles and the drafting of the fibers. A faster song might be for spinning a rougher, thicker yarn for an outer garment, while a slow, gentle ballad was better suited for producing the fine, delicate thread needed for undergarments or embroidery. The song itself became an integral part of the craft, a tool for ensuring consistency and quality, and a way of weaving their voices and their community directly into the cloth they created. The image of this tranquil, productive circle leads to a central question that historians continue to debate. Was this female-dominated world of textile production a source of community, power, and solidarity for women? Or was it primarily a symbol of their endless, unacknowledged labor and economic subjugation? The female community argument highlights the solar as a unique space where women could gather away from the direct patriarchal oversight of the hall. Here, they could share news, gossip, tell their own stories, and transmit skills and cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. It was a sphere of influence, a place where female bonds were forged and strengthened. On the other hand, the exploitation argument points to the sheer relentlessness of the work. The old adage, "A woman's work is never done," was a literal truth. This spinning was not a hobby. It was a constant demand, work that stretched from the first light of dawn until long after the men had finished their own labors for the day. The vast economic value they produced was rarely credited to them, simply absorbed into the household estate controlled by their fathers or husbands. The phantom hum of the spinning wheels seems to resonate within your chest, a sound that is profoundly peaceful and deeply powerful. You reflect on the different sounds of labor you've contemplated tonight. The armorer's sharp tap is the sound of defense. The jester's laugh is the sound of morale. But this soft, steady whir is the sound of creation itself. It is the sound of civilization being spun from raw nature, of order being twisted out of chaos, thread by patient thread. You realize that while the histories will be written about the Lord's battles and the knight's deeds, the entire enterprise rests on this quiet, foundational hum. The thread spun in the semi-darkness of the solar becomes the sail of the ship, the soldier's blanket, the noble's banner, the child's swaddling cloth. It is the literal thread that stitches their entire world together. As you finally succumb to the heavy pull of your second sleep, the gentle, generative hum of the spinning wheel is the last sound in your mind, a quiet tribute to the unseen, unending work that truly builds a kingdom. You are deep in your second and final sleep now, a heavy, dreamless state where the world of the castle has faded entirely from your conscious mind. But the castle itself does not truly sleep. Its life continues in pockets of isolated activity, its many metabolic processes churning on through the darkness. Even as you lie still, the first stirrings of the next day's sustenance are already underway, announced not by a sound that could wake you, but by a scent traveling on the cold, heavy air. It's a rich, sweet, and deeply earthy smell, like a warm, wet loaf of bread before it is baked. It is the scent of the mash, the genesis of the ale, and it tells of the brewer, another of the castle's nocturnal artisans, already at his solitary work. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that cannot be overstated. Ale was the fundamental fuel of medieval life. In a time when water sources could be dangerously contaminated, the process of brewing, specifically the boiling of the wort, rendered the final product safe to drink. It was not just a beverage, it was liquid bread, a crucial source of calories, nutrition, and morale for every single person within the walls, from the Lord celebrating a victory to the humblest servant seeking refreshment after a long day's labor. Let us travel in our minds to the brewhouse, a place set apart from the main keep. It is a world of stone, steam, and shadow. The air inside is a stark contrast to the crisp cold outside. It's warm, humid, and thick with the soupy aroma of hot water mingling with crushed malted barley. A single lantern hangs from a hook, its light struggling against the oppressive darkness, and the clouds of steam that rise from a massive wooden vessel, the mash tun. Here, the brewer, a stout figure with arms like oak branches, is engaged in the first great act of his craft. He has already heated the water in a great copper kettle and mixed it with the ground malt. Now, he uses a long wooden paddle, as tall as he is, to stir the thick, porridge-like mixture, ensuring no dry clumps remain. The sound is a heavy, rhythmic slosh and scrape, the only sound besides the crackle of the fire he carefully tends under the copper. This is not a task of brute force, but of precision. He is waking the grain, coaxing it to release its hidden sugars, the very soul of the future ale. The brewer's craft is one of deep, embodied knowledge, which leads to a quirky and essential tidbit: the brewer's thumb. In an age without thermometers, the brewer's most sensitive and crucial instrument was his own body. The temperature of the mash was absolutely critical. If the water was too cold, the natural enzymes in the malt wouldn't activate to convert the grain starches into fermentable sugars. If it was too hot, these delicate enzymes would be denatured and destroyed, ruining the entire batch. The brewer would therefore plunge his hand or elbow into the mash, his lifetime of experience allowing him to feel the exact degree of warmth required. His senses were his guide. He knew the mash was ready for its long rest not by a clock, but by its texture, its smell, and the feel of it against his own skin. This was a form of timekeeping based on biochemistry, a partnership between the artisan and his living ingredients. This seemingly magical ability to transform simple grain into the castle's lifeblood placed the brewer in an interesting social position, a topic of debate for historians. Was he viewed as a kind of practical alchemist, a master of a mysterious and vital process that no one truly understood? Or was he simply a glorified cook, a tradesman engaged in a hot, wet, and smelly business? The alchemist argument points to the reverence for the final product and the mysterious nature of fermentation. That magical bubbling and frothing was often attributed to divine intervention or secret knowledge. The brewer was a guardian of this mystery. The opposing view, however, focuses on the labor itself. Brewing was physically demanding, messy work. The brewhouse was often situated in a far corner of the bailey for a reason. It produced strong smells and required constant attention. The brewer was, in essence, a skilled laborer, essential but not noble. Unlike the armorer, whose work was directly tied to the glory and violence of the knightly class, the brewer's work was foundational, domestic, and common to all, and perhaps for that reason, less celebrated. Even in your deep sleep, your body is a part of the castle's ecosystem that the brewer's work sustains. The ale he is beginning to craft now, in the lonely hours before dawn, will be the drink that slakes your thirst tomorrow afternoon. His solitary, focused labor is the first link in a chain of energy that will fuel the entire day. Like the women spinning thread, the brewer is engaged in an act of profound and quiet creation. He is transforming the raw harvest of the field into a source of safety, nourishment, and communal joy. The sweet malty scent rising from his brewhouse is the first promise of the coming day, a subconscious assurance seeping into the dreams of the sleeping castle, a testament to the unending cycle of labor that keeps its heart beating. While the brewer toils in his warm, steamy world, another, even earlier, awakening is taking place in the biting cold of the stables. The timeline inches forward into that deep, final hour before any hint of dawn. Here, in the long timber-framed structure that houses the castle's greatest treasures, the first conscious movements of the day begin. They are not prompted by a bell or a candle, but by a more fundamental clock. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. The horses, the living engines of medieval power, were the true timekeepers of the morning. Their care was a relentless, non-negotiable duty, and the grooms and stable boys who tended them were, by necessity, the very first people to rise. The well-being of a lord's destrier, his warhorse, was paramount, for on its strength and health his own life in battle depended. The smooth gait of a lady's palfrey and the raw power of the draft horses were just as vital to the castle's function and prestige. Imagine the stable boy, perhaps no older than 15, roused from his rough bed in the hayloft not by a sound he can ignore, but by a chorus of living signals. He is pulled from sleep by the soft, breathy whicker of a mare in the stall below, a sound of gentle inquiry for her morning oats. This is followed by the impatient scrape of a hoof on the stone floor from the lord's prized charger, a creature of habit and high spirit. The boy swings his legs into the cold air, his first act to light a single, precious lantern. Its weak, flickering flame pushes back the immense, absolute darkness of the stable, revealing a world of towering, silent shapes. The air is thick with the warm animal smell of horses, the clean, dry scent of hay, and the sharp, earthy tang of manure. His movements are slow and stiff with cold, but practiced as he begins the day's first and most essential chores. The boy's relationship with his charges is a testament to a quirky or fringe tidbit of his craft, the animal clock in its most intimate form. He is not just a laborer, he is a linguist of a non-verbal language. He knows every sound and movement. He can distinguish the low, contented rumble of the old draft horse from the nervous, high-pitched whinny of a young colt still adjusting to its surroundings. He knows the subtle shift in posture that might indicate the onset of colic, a swift and deadly ailment. His clock is a symphony of these living signals. As he moves down the line of stalls, pouring grain into the wooden troughs, his own sounds become part of the morning's conversation. He makes a low, clicking sound with his tongue to soothe the nervous colt, murmurs a soft greeting to the lord's palfrey, and gives a familiar, affectionate pat to the powerful neck of the destrier. This silent, intuitive communication is the heart of his skill, a bond of trust between a boy and beasts, worth a fortune, a language no one else in the castle fully understands. This position of immense responsibility, held by someone so low on the social ladder, creates a fascinating historical debate. Was the life of a stable boy one of relentless, thankless drudgery, or was it a unique position of unspoken trust and importance? The argument for drudgery is compelling. The work was endless and physically grueling, hauling heavy buckets of water from the well in the freezing dark, forking mounds of soiled straw into a barrow, and spending hours grooming the massive animals. He was perpetually surrounded by the smell of manure, and his social standing was near the bottom. Yet the argument for trust is just as strong. These horses were priceless assets. A fully armored knight was a fearsome weapon, but he was useless without his trained warhorse. To entrust the health and readiness of these creatures to a young boy required an extraordinary degree of faith in his diligence, his knowledge, and his loyalty. While he would never dine at the high table, the stable boy was the trusted custodian of the very source of the Lord's military power and status. The stable boy's lantern bobs in the darkness, a single mobile point of light in the sleeping world. It is the first human-held light of the new day, a spark of intention and care in the vast, cold stillness. His work, responding to the needs of the living creatures in his charge, represents the true beginning of the castle's daily cycle. While the brewer's work was a solitary process, the boy's work is a relationship, an interaction that begins to wake the world. Outside, the night is still absolute, the stars still sharp in a black sky. But here, in the stable, the first conscious, deliberate acts of the morning are underway. The gentle, rhythmic sound of the great horses chewing their grain is the first peaceful, productive noise of the day. It is the sound of the castle's engines being fueled, a quiet promise of the power and movement that the rising sun will soon demand. This single, lonely lantern is the true dawn, a small, humble flame, leading the way out of the long, deep night. And so, we leave the castle here, poised on the fragile cusp between the last moments of the night and the first promise of the day. The journey that began in the warm, communal glow of the great hall has led us through the castle's hidden nocturnal worlds. We have felt the chill of the dungeon's timeless despair, heard the quiet diligence of the armorer's hammer, and sensed the gentle hum of the spinner's wheel. We have stood vigil with the healer, dreamt with the hounds, and stalked the shadows with the cat. We have witnessed the quiet alchemy of the brewer, and now we stand with the stable boy whose small lantern holds the first spark of the morning. Your own candle clock, your guide through this tapestry of sleeping and waking, has burned its course. Its purpose is complete. The night has unspooled its stories, its fears, and its quiet, essential labors. Now, a new time is coming, a time that will be measured not by a flickering flame, but by the growing light in the eastern sky. Let the final sounds, the soft chewing of the horses, the distant stirrings from the bakehouse, be a gentle lullaby. The air is cold and pure with anticipation. The great bell in the tower is silent, waiting. The rooster has not yet cleared his throat to crow. You are in the final, precious moments of peace before the day begins its relentless march. Let the story dissolve. Allow your own breathing to be the only rhythm. The night has done its work, and now it is time to rest. Close your eyes, let the darkness behind them be soft and comforting, and drift into a final, peaceful slumber. Sweet dreams.